Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is a follow-up video to my childhood questionnaire. But first I want to say that thank you so much for your comments, for your thoughts, for those that subscribe to the channel. There'll be more to come about childhood and healthy parenting coming up. I really love the comments. I really love that the video was thought-provoking or made you curious or it really resonated with you or validated you. So I really appreciate that we have a sense of community going on in the comments. Let's see. So the things I want to cover in this video to clarify some things from the questionnaire are the scoring, the term sexually off, and then after that I'm going to throw some of the questions on the screen and get into the mechanics or the nature of those questions, which are actually more important than the score. So we'll do that. Okay, so the score. First off, out of the gates, is scoring a 5 on this thing, as I get it, is super hard. And it is reserved. The folks that would score a 5 on that, they come from family systems where they really got their needs met. And they are the minority in society. There's just people that we've seen, coworkers or through school, and they really seem like they come from a healthy family system. Everybody has stuff, but the people who score low are the minority. So if you scored high on this thing, it's okay and you're in good company. I do have an agenda behind the questionnaire, and that agenda is to really, as a society, to look at our parenting, to look at the generational transmission of not noticing what children need emotionally. An example of that in the US, only in the last 10 years or so, that we've decided as a country that bullying is bad. And I'm being facetious about that's some really slow progress. But on paper it looks bad, kids are still being bullied, but the positive is like we've sort of as a nation said like, no, this isn't good anymore. And we still have miles and miles to go on that. So that's what I mean about progress being slow, and that for us to really look at the way that we were raised and in a way really commit to not passing that stuff on. That's my agenda behind that stuff. But the high scores, the scoring, if it's high, it's okay. I really want you guys to really look more at what the questions mean to you and to use those as a tool to start working on some things. So that's that piece with the scoring. The other piece about the scoring is this is a questionnaire. It is not diagnostic criteria. So I want you guys to walk away looking at and deciding about whether you grew up in an abusive environment. That's what the nature of the questionnaire is about. It is not about figuring out if you have a diagnosis. You can sort of go see somebody, bounce somebody. You can, to get a ballpark, you can go to the DSM-5 or Google PTSD or complex trauma and really see if you fit in those criteria. And the problem that I find with diagnoses is they tend to be boxy. They can be very, very helpful to look at symptoms and to look at things. But I'll just leave it at that and maybe do another video down the road about that. But again, the point of the questionnaire is for people to walk away and to really look at their childhood from a standpoint of, was it abusive? What was the environment like? What was mom and dad like? What was the parenting like? And as the third piece about the scoring is that these questions can mean other things. It is designed, again, to have you guys look at your childhood and look at the parenting. But if you take a bunch of those questions, they will line up with ADHD or ADD. Even someone who's going through a postpartum depression might score high on that thing. So just to know that, I'm not saying that this is what it is. But it is for you to decide to really think about in terms of your childhood about whether there was abuse there. So there's that piece. Okay, the term sexually off, or the parent sexually off, which came up in the video, that means whether the parents protected children or not from adult concepts. Was there an exposure to pornography? Were the parents lewd about sex? Did they overly share about ideas that were really for adults? Was there a touchy-feeliness? Or even a sexually, for a parent to be sexually repressed is to be sexually off, meaning that there's just something going on there. It's not the loud, blatant sexual abuse that might come up in molestation and things like that. It's really subtle stuff that can make us kind of feel icky. What else would be another example? Like sort of even if you're brought up in religious fundamentalism, and again, side note is coming from a religious family, religious or religion, not bad, but when it becomes fundamental, sort of like cultish behavior or extreme black and white thinking or explaining the world from sort of a dogma, that can become abusive. That's what I'm sort of saying there with that. So if you grow up with a parent, let's just say the family's watching a movie and they're hyper religious, is there's a charge if something sexual comes up in the movie, and it's sort of that's what I mean about sexually off. There's a big reaction to things, and not being sexually off is just basically a healthy discussion, protection of for children against adults, protection of children against things that they really can't handle or shouldn't have to know about. Even sexually off can mean that the parents have affairs or infidelity and that kind of a thing. So hopefully that clarifies that. So what we'll move on to now is we'll throw some of the questions up on the screen and we'll get into the nuts and bolts about what they mean.
Okay, so number 15, I struggle with ambiguity, loose ends, things left up in the air, and people not getting back to me. This question in our adult lives revolves around trust. It revolves around the ability to basically be patient. It involves the ability to let things go and just kind of roll with things. Why that's hard for trauma survivors who grew up in dysfunction is it was very much true in childhood that people were unreliable in getting what you needed. And then when that happens, we tend to overly value external cues that were okay. Like we don't have it on the inside that we'll manage and we'll be all right. So we overly rely on the date getting back to us, someone texting back to us quicker, as we would want it quicker, because waiting is just really hard because it's being triggered back to whether people are going to show up for you and whether you're worthy of being shown up for. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, number 21, I have difficulty tapping into anger or possibly have too much of it. When you grow up in dysfunction, I find that the dysfunctional family, when it comes to conflict resolution, they have kind of just two tools in the toolbox. One is to repress and not say anything, or the other is to blow up after an extended period of time, like a bottleneck. So in therapy, learning to express anger in a healthy way, or even to say that some people feel like they're going to freak out if they tell somebody that they're frustrated, is we find ourselves in a place where there's too little of it or too much of it. So growing up in a dysfunctional family system, there's probably a well of anger that needs to be processed. And reclaiming right-sized anger is a beautiful thing because it's a natural human emotion. And really anger is, or frustration is our compass. It really tells you how to move and what to do. If you're being treated poorly at work, or you're treated poorly in a relationship, or something's coming on, is most people don't want to become a perpetrator and put their anger away. Or that some people really try to repress it and then they have too much anger going on, probably modeled by mom and dad, and then really distrust themselves with their own anger. Okay, number 22, I can be overly focused on fairness. Here are some examples of how fairness can be triggering in the present. Triggers around when the check comes to a table and you might feel shame that you're not paying enough and you should be paying more. This one generally tends to be more about that we're not doing enough, or we're not giving enough, or we're not being fair enough, as a function of shame, as a function of perhaps seeing parents who took advantage. So it's really, in my mind, it's either really making sure we never take advantage of anybody and really distorting our present life in that way. Or the other side of it, we can often feel taken advantage of, and really sort of, or even seeing other people being taken advantage and be really triggered by that. But it is sort of, when it comes to even around gift giving, is sort of many trauma survivors go over the top with gift giving because they just don't want to seem like they're being unfair or selfish and that kind of a thing. Number 10, I tend to get through things rather than fully experience and enjoy them. Vacations, holidays, projects, shopping, gatherings. This is an interesting one. I find that many trauma survivors are in a certain mode, whether that mode is a rushing mode, rushing through things, or a survival mode where everything is too intense or too important. It can also be the mode of nothing you do feels sort of good enough, so there's bringing an intensity to things that don't need to be that intense. Like I have trauma survivors that go on vacation and they're really worried about doing their vacation correctly, or that it's going to be restful enough. And we do some work around that and really isolate where that came up in childhood. Perhaps that was modeled by mom and dad. Perhaps mom and dad were in a survival mode, that were in an up anxiety mode where everything felt too important. Hopefully that makes sense. Number 23, I can get upset when others don't read what is going on with me. In childhood, it makes me think about a childhood where the family, it wasn't safe to express yourself emotionally, nor was it modeled how to do that. So many times that we can grow up in adulthood with this kind of habit of really desperately wanting others to know, but we have a hard time expressing. We can even get really resentful when people don't pick up, in a way, because we're giving out those vibes. And once you cue in that you're doing this, it's an amazing thing to work on, to become more and more direct and be more risk taking and to be less afraid of expressing what's going on. As a parent myself, some of these things that are listed on the questionnaire, these are things that actually children do in healthy development, and it's our family's job to help us mature to a place where we can talk about these things. Number 24, I can overpower or shut down during conflict. In childhood, if you think about how your parents resolved conflict, this is where most of this stuff comes from. Our families teach us, really, they only give us a couple tools when it comes to, our dysfunctional families. Only give us a couple tools. One is to either really shut down, not say anything, repress it, be codependent in that way, or the other tool is to blow up, is to get really reactive. The person who overpowers tends to go into something called lawyer mode, which is a finger pointing, very building a case. I call it lawyer mode. I use that in my groups. People relate to it in a way that when they get upset, they can really do conflict from a place of keeping score. Like, no, it was Tuesday. I was doing the dishes. You gave me a funny look, and here we are again. And they can really be very crystal clear about what the problem is in an attacking way. It's not a very loving way. The person who is shuts down is someone who loses their words, overly apologizes, doesn't know what to say or do. In both of these responses, neither one is good or bad over the other. It just means that there's adrenaline going through the system, that they're triggered, and they're probably both trauma survivors, not knowing how to be loving and resolve conflict in that way. Number 20, small talk can make me disinterested, irritated, or uncomfortable. This is one of the most interesting questions. I've got a lot of questions about this question, and I feel like it comes from a place in childhood where the adults really don't teach children how to make a connection. That's one piece. The other piece is that it can be a trigger back to a family that doesn't really know how to have conversations, or that they are very surfacey. You can often feel manipulated in small talk. Like, in a way, like an example, let's just say that you have a very narcissistic parent, or a parent that's kind of checked out, and when they try to make a connection with you, it can sometimes feel like a betrayal. Like if there's a divorce and then one parent is really MIA and they call you and they're sort of like, so how is school going? There's going to be a big charge to that, because that child, they're feeling their feelings about it, and they're sort of like, really, you haven't been in my life in 2 years and you're asking me about my teacher, so there can be that charge to it of the uncomfortability or not trusting what the person is doing there. The other piece that it makes me think about is of really being an isolative sort of like non-communicated family where the adults don't really have relationships with other adults, so it can be really isolative and socially challenged in that way. Number 14, being wrong or right means too much to me. This question revolves around shame. And there's a polar thing going on with being wrong or right. Here's what I mean is if I get a time, let's just say a client and I scheduled to do an appointment on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. And if I either make a mistake or they make a mistake, and we connect and we're like, oh, what happened there? I thought we were meeting at 10. The person who is focused on being wrong so much will automatically assume that they made the mistake because of their shame. I could have made the mistake. Then the other type of client where I may call them and say, oh, what happened is they may feel that they really need to defend themselves in a way that, I just might call them and say, oh, I thought we were meeting at 10. Well, I wonder what happened there. And if they feel like their shame might say that they're being attacked and they have to stand up for themselves, is they may over the top go like, no, it's right here. I told you it was, it's right here in the email, and like they're a little bit keyed up about what I think about them, or they're keyed up in a way that they might feel attacked. Where the person who's feeling wrong is assuming that they were the ones to mess up. Both are a function of shame. The person who feels like they are wrong all the time, it's definitely a function of shame. And the person who feels the need to be right all the time is defending against potentially feeling shame. Hopefully that makes sense. So that was some of the questions and getting into the mechanics about how they relate to childhood trauma and childhood abuse. I hope you guys found the video helpful. Please hit the subscribe button if you want to see more videos. I'm going to be doing 2 of these videos a month. And thank you so much for your time. And if you do have other questions about questions that weren't on the video, please put them in the comment section of this one and ask away. What does it mean? Happy to answer. Thank you guys and have a great day.